Chapter 18 of The Copper Princess. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betsy Bush, August 2009. The Copper Princess by Kirk Munroe. Chapter 18. From One Trap into Another. The light of another day was dimly penetrating those underground depths before our prisoner was prepared to make his last effort for liberty. For all the aid he would receive from the pitiful amount allotted to him, he might as well have started hours earlier. But while he longed to make the trial, he also dreaded it. The thought of that box-like passage, through which he would be obliged to force his way, without a chance of retreat, was so terrible that he shrank from it, as we all will shrink from anything dangerous or painful. Then, too, if he should escape, he would want daylight by which to guide his future movements. So, after tossing for hours on his hard bed and considering every aspect of his situation, he finally fell into a troubled sleep that lasted until morning. For breakfast he had only water, but of this he drank as much as he could, for he knew not when he would find another supply. Then he selected such of the copper tools as he thought might prove useful. Into one of them, which was a sort of a pick, he fitted a rude wooden handle, while the others, which had cutting edges and were in the nature of knives, he thrust into his pockets. Having thus completed his simple preparations, he took a long look, that he well knew might be his last, on the daylight that was now so doubly precious, and then resolutely faced the inner gloom of the ancient mine. Determined to save his candle for use in the unknown winds, he slowly groped his way through utter darkness, and finally reached what he believed to be the end of the drift. Now he lighted his candle, and for a moment his unaccustomed eyes ached from the glare of its flame. He was, as he had thought, at the lower opening of the narrow passage, and, as he noted its steep upward slope, he was agitated by conflicting hopes and fears. It might lead to liberty, but there was an equal chance that in it he should miserably perish. At the very outset he was confronted by a condition that was not only disappointing, but exerted a most depressing influence. There was no draught, such as he had believed would issue from the winds. In vain did he hold up a wetted finger, in vain watch for the slightest flicker in the flame of his candle. The air was as stagnant as that of a dungeon. And yet there certainly had been a decided current at that very place only a few hours before. Puzzled and disheartened, he was still determined to press forward, and stooping low he entered the passage. It almost immediately became so contracted that he was compelled to creep on hands and knees, by which method he slowly and painfully overcame foot after foot of the ascent. A little later he was forcing his way with infinite labor, an inch at a time, through a space so narrow that he was squeezed almost to breathlessness. He was also bathed in perspiration, and was obliged to recruit his strength by frequent halts. At length his candle, which had burned low, was about to expire. With despairing eyes he watched its last flickering flame, feeling only the terror of impending darkness, and heedless of the fact that it was burning his hand. With the quenching of its final spark he resigned himself to his fate. He had fought his best, but the odds against him were too heavy, and now his strength was exhausted. Closing his eyes and resting his head wearily on his folded arms, he prepared for the oblivion that he prayed might come speedily. Lying thus, and careless of the passage of time, he was visited by pleasant dreams, in which were mingled happy voices, laughter, and singing. He rested on a couch of roses, and cool breeze fanned his fevered brow. He was free as air itself, and surrounded by illimitable space. All at once he became conscious that he was not dreaming, but was wide awake and staring with incredulous eyes at a glimmer of light, so well-nigh imperceptible that only by passing a hand before his face, and so shutting it out for an instant, could he be certain of its existence. At the same time an unmistakable draught of air was finding its way to him, and a voice as of an angel came to his ears faintly, but distinctly, with a snatch of a gay song. With hot blood surging to his brain, the poor fellow tried to call out, but the words died in his parched throat, and he could only emit a husky whisper. Then he struggled forward, and found himself in a larger space that widened rapidly until he was able to sit up and move his arms with freedom. He had reached the end of the passage, for above his head he could feel only a smooth surface of rock. The singing had ceased, the ray of light had faded into darkness, and the draught of air was no longer felt. But Peveril had noted the aperture by which it had come, and could now thrust his hand through this into a vacant space beyond. It seemed to him that the rock above his head was but a slab of no great thickness, and he tried to lift it. For some minutes he could not succeed, but finally he secured a purchase, got his shoulders directly beneath it, and, with a mighty upward heave, moved it slightly from the bed in which it had lain for centuries. With another powerful effort it was lifted the fraction of an inch, and though it immediately settled back in place, the prisoner knew that the time of his deliverance had come. He could not raise the great slab bodily, but with wedges he could hold the gain of each upward lift. His first aid of this kind were the copper knives that he had brought with him. Then, by a dim light that came through the crevice thus opened, he used his pick to break off fragments of rock which were slipped under the slab. It was thus raised and supported an inch at a time, until at length an opening nearly 2 feet in width was presented. The moment this was effected, Peveril drew himself through it, and with a great sigh of thankfulness for his marvellous escape, lay for some minutes recovering breath after his tremendous exertions and studying his new surroundings. Although the small amount of light greeting his eyes as he lifted the rock had shown that he was not to emerge into the open air, he could not help a feeling of disappointment at finding himself still underground. To be sure, he was in a spacious chamber or cavern, he could not tell which, illuminated by a faintly diffused light that gave promise of some connection with the outer world, but he feared this might prove to be another unscalable shaft, in which case he would be no better off than before. In fact, he might find himself worse off, for he was desperately thirsty and could see no sign of water. "It would be pretty hard lines if I should be compelled to return to my old well for a drink," he said to himself. As soon as he had recovered breath, Peveril rose to his feet and began to walk slowly towards that part of the cavern where the light seemed brightest. As he went he looked eagerly on all sides for some trace of the singer whose voice had inspired him with a new hope at the moment of his blackest despair, but no person was to be seen or heard. At the same time he found abundant proof that human beings had recently visited this place, and would doubtless soon do so again. This was in the shape of boxes, bales, and casks piled against the walls on both sides of the passage. For a moment Peveril was greatly puzzled by these. Then, as he recalled Joe Pintaud's conversation regarding smugglers, he concluded that he had stumbled across a depot of goods belonging to those free traders of the Great Lake. "In which case," he said to himself, "I shall surely be out of here within a few minutes, for an entrance for smugglers must mean an exit for prisoners." This was a sound theory, but, like a great many other theories, one that proved faulty upon practical application, as our young friend discovered a few minutes later. Directly beyond the packages of goods he came upon a small derrick, set firmly into the solid rock at both top and bottom. It was a substantial block and fall attachment, and was swung inward. At this point also a heavy tarpaulin, reaching from floor to ceiling, was hung completely across the cavern. Cautiously raising one corner of this, Peveril was blinded by such a flood of light that for a moment he was completely dazzled. As his vision was gradually restored he found himself on the brink of a precipice and gazing out over a boundless expanse of water, in fact, over the Great Lake itself. A narrow ledge projected a little beyond the curtain that he had lifted, and as he hesitatingly stepped out upon it, he also instinctively grasped a small cedar that grew from it to steady himself while he looked down. The descent was sheer for 20 feet, and so smooth as not to afford a single foothold along its entire face. From the rippling water at its base rose a jagged ledge of black rocks, which Peveril recognized the moment his eyes fell upon them. "Of all mysteries, this is the most inexplicable!" he cried. "And yet it surely is the very place." As he spoke, he turned to look at the curtain which he had let fall behind him, and very nearly tumbled from the ledge in amazement at what he saw. Instead of the sheet of dingy canvas that he expected, he was confronted by a sheer wall of cliff, stained the same rusty red as that extending for miles on either side, and apparently not differing from it in any particular. He was compelled to reach out his hand and touch it before he could dispel the illusion and convince himself that only a sheet of painted canvas separated him from the cavern he had just left. "It is one of the very cleverest things in the way of a hiding-place I ever heard of," he said half aloud. "And now I understand the disappearance of that girl. But where on earth did she come from? How did she get here? And where did she go to? Could it have been she whom I heard singing a little while ago? If so, where is she now? Not in the cavern, that I'll swear to." Peveril might have speculated at much greater length concerning this mystery, had not the sight of water that he could not reach so aggravated his thirst that for the moment he could think of little else. All at once he hit upon a plan, and 2 minutes later had drawn aside the curtain, swung out the little derrick, and was letting himself down towards the ledge by means of its tackle. Lying flat on the rough rocks, he drank and drank of the delicious water, lifting his head for breath or to gaze ecstatically around him, and then thrusting it again into the cool flood for the pleasure of feeling the water on his hot cheeks. At length a slight sound caused him to turn quickly and look upward. To his dismay and astonishment, the tackle by which he had lowered himself had disappeared. Unless he could make up his mind to swim for miles through water of icy coldness, he was as truly a prisoner on that ledge of rock as ever he had been in the underground depths from which he had so recently escaped. Chapter 18.